Power Talks met Janneke Stielstra, aflevering 60. In this Power Talk, I will interview inspiring and successful entrepreneurs, opinion leaders, best-selling authors and other people who make a difference in this world. Download my free ebook now, in which I share the 7 habits of successful entrepreneurs with you. Go to jannekestielstra.nl to download the ebook right away. Today I'm really exciting. He is the godfather of sketchnoting. He's a designer, author and illustrator. He has a passion for simple and usable design solutions. He wrote 2 books, the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook. He is also the illustrator of the book Rework and Remote. I managed to invite none other than Mike Rohde. Welcome to my podcast, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me, Janneke. This is really wonderful.
Thank you. First of all, what I want to ask you is, what means success for you?
You know, I was thinking a little bit about this, and I think for me, success means that everyone wins. So for many, you know, the idea of success is that I dominate you and I take everything and you have nothing. And I don't know I don't think that's sustainable. The idea that you take everything and someone else loses everything, or, you know, something like that is just maybe not so sustainable. And for me, successful means when I get the thing that I want, and it's highly valuable, and you get something that you want and it's highly valuable to you, and that we both come out thinking that we got the better deal. And that happens as much as I try to have it happen. It happens sometimes, and whenever that happens, I feel quite happy with that solution.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. Great. I'm curious. I know for sure. I know sketchnoting, but the listeners maybe they don't know. What are sketchnotes and why? Yeah, should they use them?
Sure. That's a great question, and it's one I get asked quite a bit, of course. So sketchnotes, I like to call them Notes Plus, because it's not so different from the notes you may take now, your handwritten notes. So you're still writing with text. What I recommend is to enhance them. We add visuals to them. So it could be maybe just little icons in the right column. Let's say you write still just plain text notes, and then you add icons to the right. Or maybe it's half and half. Maybe half of it's drawing and half of it's writing. Or maybe in some cases it's mostly drawing, and then you're just annotating, you know, putting notes and tidbits of information around the drawing. So it can be any of those things. But what it is a combination of both writing and drawing together. And the reason that I think it's valuable and helpful for someone to consider sketchnoting is, first of all, it's fun to do. It's fun to do drawing while you're writing, and being able to take the things you're imagining or hearing or thinking about and draw them out and then pair them with the written word is also very valuable for your memory, because when you're using these 2 channels of your brain, the verbal side and the visual side, using them together, and then additionally, if you're using your hand, you know, to draw or write, it combines those together and it records it in your memory in more places than one. So let's say if you only wrote text notes, right, just verbal notes, it would store it in one area. And if you use the visual capability and only draw, it stores it in another area. And when you blend the 2 together, now it's actually doubling that capability. It's using both of those parts of the brain and turning on them.
Remember.
Yeah, and so it provides, basically it's just sort of guarding against only a single point of failure, right? You're both the hearing, you've got the writing, you've got the movement of your arm, you've got using the part of your brain to draw. All those work together, and it helps you remember more information.
I use mind mapping really often, and I teach other people to mind map. What's the difference actually between sketchnotes and mind mapping?
I think they're very similar. I think they both fall under the broad category of what we would call visual thinking. So any kind of thinking where you're using drawing skills. That could be working on a whiteboard, it could be mind mapping, it could be journey mapping, any of those things where you're making use of visuals. Mind mapping tends to be a very specific way of doing visuals, so typically you might start with a center concept or an idea, And then from that center concept, or it doesn't have to be in the center of the page, of course, it can be in the corner or whatever. But from there, then you draw lines and you have other boxes or circles or whatever shape you like to represent other ideas that relate and how they branch. So in some ways, there are ways that Sketchnotes can use this structure. I think Sketchnotes can go beyond that because you're not limited to only using that structure. You can do a linear format like a book does, right? So you can start in the top left and go to the bottom right, and you can do columns, you can do different paths around the page, so you have a variety of options. And I think often mind mapping can focus a lot more on writing verbal things, so maybe the drawing part of it is simply making the shape in which you draw the text, where I think sketchnoting maybe goes to the next level where you might actually be drawing, say, icons or something along with the text, and you're filling in more of the visual part of it in that way. So I think they're related, but they're slightly different.
Yeah, it's really fun to do. I started to make sketch notes of all of my podcast, to make them of my podcast, and it's really fun to do. And then it's I think it's even more easy to remember because you use a lot of images. That's what I what I found out.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So, yep, I think they're both very valuable, and I think there's cases where maybe a mind map makes the most sense, but you can certainly even augment a mind map by drawing in the mind map, so you don't necessarily have to only use text. You can, of course, draw pictures inside the mind map as another way to capture that information. So that's a way they can work together and both be part of the process.
Yeah. How did you actually start with doing sketch notes?
That's a really good question and an interesting story. I always say that I was very good at taking notes and I hated it at the same time. And the reason I say that was around end of 2006, so it's about 10 years ago now. I was very good at taking notes, but the problem was I looked at notes as though I were someone, say a court reporter, in the court of law when they have someone writing everything everyone says. That's what I felt like, that I had this burden that I had to write everything down that I was hearing if I went to a conference or in a talk or what have you. I had this feeling like I had to write everything down, and if I missed something, there was all the stress around missing something, right? And it got to be too much near the end of 2006. Like I said, I was very good at note-taking, and I hated taking them because it was so painful. So I had this idea that maybe I should just change the requirements of how I take notes, and maybe that would lead to a solution. As a designer, I'm very often faced with those types of limitations. So as an example, I might work on an application for the web or for a native application in my work, and they'll say, well, the screen sizes are these sizes, or we have this logo and these colors that you need to work with, or we have to have it in 2 weeks, right? There's some limitation that's always placed on these projects. And so I thought maybe what I should do is actually put limitations on myself. They can be whatever I like. Some other information about the way I took notes was because I was worried about writing everything down, I used to have giant notebooks, like A4 size notebooks. And additionally, I used a pencil because I had these concerns that if I needed to fix a typographic error, like writing someone's name wrong, or if I wanted to add something, I wanted the ability to erase the text and change it. So I was using a pencil and a giant book, and I felt this burden to write everything down. So I thought, what would be the most opposite of that situation? I thought, well, what if I used a small book? Because if I use a small book, then I literally cannot write everything down like I used to. It would sort of force me out of that space.
And you have to.
Yes. So it so happened that I had purchased one of these little black moleskin notebooks at the bookstore, and I hadn't used it because it was so beautiful. I didn't know what was worth, marking the pages, because then I would ruin this beautiful, object. So it sat on my desk for months. So I had this notebook, and I thought, well, maybe I'll use that notebook. That would be something I can use that for now. And then I also decided maybe I should switch from the pencil. And by switching from the pencil to a pen, it would force me to be more deliberate about the things I put in that small notebook. So I made that decision. I said, all right, let's take this small notebook and a pen, and I'll travel to this next conference I have in early 2007 in Chicago. So I took the train down there, and I went to the conference, and I decided to try this idea. And what I found was, as I sat down to listen to the talks, I was sort of freed of worrying about writing everything down because I knew there was no way I could write it. I just had not enough pages or space. So that was off the table. And then I didn't have a pencil, so I knew that whatever I wrote was going to be permanently on the page, or
Yes.
I would turn it into a flower, or something. I would have to cover it up somehow. So it sort of put me in a different mindset. And once I had those two limitations in place, it sort of made me realize that there's only a few things from this conference I'm very likely that I will apply in my life, right? Things that are valuable that I can immediately see I could use tomorrow or today. So why don't I focus on those things instead of everything? And once I made those three decisions, it became really natural to start taking notes this way. I was having fun because I was making choices about, oh, that's really interesting, or you know what, that's not so interesting, I'll leave that alone. And then because I had the pen, I was very careful about what I wrote. So I was suddenly had more free time, oddly enough, than before, where I was rushing around trying to capture every detail. In this case, I was letting things go, and suddenly I had this free time, and I could start to do things like make the typography look very nice. I could do lettering.
Yes.
I could do bolder and bigger. I could try fancy typography if I wanted. I could draw pictures of the person speaking, or if maybe there was an idea that got presented and I had an image in my mind, I had the free time, a little bit more free time, to draw that idea on the page. And so at the end of that first event, I immediately knew that this was the new way that I wanted to take notes in this context. And from there, I just kept on doing it and exploring how far can I push this, or how long can I take notes. So one test was I went to South by Southwest Interactive in Austin, Texas, which was a great experience, and I decided to see how many days could I take sketch notes in a row. So I took my notebook again and filled it up with notes, and found that it actually was possible. I was worried that maybe would my hand cramp, or would I become tired. As it turned out, it was tougher on my mind than it was on my hand in many ways. Just the processing of information, I wasn't used to that. But I really liked the result of what came out of it. And so that's put me on the path to doing this visual note-taking that I called it sketchnoting, and that name seemed to fit. People seemed to like the name, and now there's many people all over the world, in the Netherlands, in Europe, in Asia, everywhere in the world are doing this sketchnoting idea based on this, idea that was started back about 10 years ago of intentionally taking notes in this unusual way.
If you go to Instagram, you see a lot of great creations. They're cool. Yes. I'm also curious, what is the sketch note where you're most proud of?
That is a good question. There's so many, it's hard to choose in some ways. It's like choosing your favorite child, right? It's not so easy to say that.
That's not possible.
If I would say there's a few that I could mention. So when I began experimenting with sketchnoting, I started to push it in other directions. So one of the directions that I pushed it in was taking travel notes. So I love to travel. I don't travel as much as I used to when I was still single, but I still love to travel, and I get opportunities, especially teaching workshops and such around sketchnoting very often. And what I like to do is I take a notebook along and I capture the time that I travel. So as an example, particularly for the Netherlands, I was in Amsterdam in 2014 giving a presentation on sketchnoting by chance, and I stayed in Amsterdam for, I think, 3 days. So I took a little notebook along, and I just documented everything that I was doing each day. And I would draw pictures of the places what I was visiting, and of the canals and the buildings and things, so that I would remember. But also it turned out to be something I could share with others. And I was really proud of how well the sketch notes from my Amsterdam trip turned out. And I can certainly provide you a link for that, so if others are interested in seeing those, I've got those on Flickr for someone if they would like to take a look, see what that looks
cool.
like.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So that's one, and then there's many others. South by Southwest, there are some that I've done that I'm really proud of, and there's just such a variety. Again, it's hard to choose just one.
Yeah. If people want to start with Sketchnotes, and how do you have some advice how to start with it?
Yes, that is a great question as well. And you know, when I wrote the two books, especially the first book, I knew that if I couldn't convince people that they could at least draw a little bit, that it would be very hard for them to buy the book, right? Of course. And many people will come to me and say, you know, I can't draw, Mike, so I can't sketchnote,
I'm
right?
sorry, I can't draw. I hear it all the time.
Yes, yes. And so that's immediately the challenge. Immediately I knew that was a challenge I would have to face if I would convince someone to go further. And, you know, I believe that everyone can draw. It's a matter of what quality and ability you have. And much of that relates to how much you practice and how much you know, do it regularly. Because I think from what I've seen, people who practice regularly get better quickly. So I think, first of all, is a mindset that you can do it and that it's much more about practice and not so much about talent. It's really a skill that you can learn. The second mindset thing I would say before you begin is sketchnotes are really for you, and they're really about the ideas that you want to capture so you can take them forward and make action from them, right? So this is really about ideas and not art. So, you know, we aren't trying to be, you know, Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci or something with the quality of our drawing. Those guys spent years and years practicing their drafting skills and went to school for that, so it's unfair for us to judge ourselves against the great artists of history, right? It's or even a modern artist, right? Because their focus is in a different place. If you're an entrepreneur, you know, it's better that you are able to draw the idea enough that you can remember it, and then maybe someone else can understand it too. That's really the level we're talking about. So it's really about ideas and not art. So that would be the second mindset thing. The third thing I'll say is, practically speaking, you can draw in simpler ways than you might imagine. And this was the technique that I captured in the book. And it was this idea that if we break down drawing into using simple shapes, it becomes much easier to build things. So the way I prescribe drawing is using 5 simple shapes: a square, a circle, a triangle, a line, and a dot. And the idea is that you almost put these together like Lego blocks. You put the pieces together. And what you do is you observe the thing you want to draw either in physical space, like, say, a coffee cup, or if it's an idea in your head, and you imagine, what is the simplest way I can draw this thing with a square or a circle or a triangle or lines. And, you know, those elements can be modified. So let's say a square can be a rectangle, or it can be a parallelogram, right? You can adjust the sides, angles, and so on. A circle can be an oval. There can be many circles together, and then you have a cloud, right? Or lines can be straight or wiggly or zigzag, and then dots can be, you know, put together in a group to make, you know, a pattern or so on. So these were the 5 basic shapes I could boil drawing down to, and then I walk through in the book simple ways to do that. And I'll provide a link to you. I've got some things online that someone can look at and see what these shapes look like, and then what simple things you can draw.
For me, this advice, it was a really eye-opener. The 5 things you just told us, that it makes really easy to draw. So that was a great eye-opener for me as well.
Mm-hmm. I would say, if I would say a 4th thing, so let's say you've got the mindset things. You understand that, you know, this is a lot about that perspective on what you're doing, and then you keep your drawing simple. I think the last thing would be simply giving it a try and starting slow. Yep. So my recommendation for many people who are beginning, if they're already note takers, is simply maybe do a column. Let's say you have a sheet of A4 paper, and maybe you write on the left side. Maybe it's even lined paper. It doesn't even really matter. Maybe what you do is you imagine or draw like a little section on the right side of your page, and you leave that space for your drawings. And you still write the notes just like you did on the left, but maybe on the right you imagine what the drawing would be for that concept and you put it in. Or maybe afterwards, when you're reviewing your notes, you come back and you write that, you draw the concept in that column. And it's a way to sort of slowly bring the drawings into your thinking. Eventually, then maybe you can start to integrate the drawings into the writing, so they start mixing together. And then at that point, then you can start experimenting with, maybe this one I'll do more drawing, and that lets you slowly work your way towards using sketchnoting in a new way. I think the challenge would be if you felt like you had to do sketchnotes like I do after 10 years of practice, that's unfair to you as a beginner. It's much better to start in a simple way and simply add some icons that are simple and then work your way forward from there.
Yeah, that's true. If you look back to your career as a sketchnoter, what are the most successful moments so far for you?
That's a really wonderful question, and I've got a few things that I can call out as specifically good. So the first one I would say was when I released my first book. So it was a very hard process. I was in a unique situation with my publisher. They gave me lots of freedom with that book, and if you see the book, you'll see what I mean, because
yeah, it's like Sketchnotes.
Yeah, it's basically a sketch note in a book form, and we were given the freedom to choose the paper stock, so the cover stock is much heavier than normal. The pages inside the book are a cream color instead of white. The corners are rounded, so it doesn't, dog ear on the edge. And the colors are black and orange, very good Dutch colors, right? So we were really proud of how the production came out. But the thing we didn't know was, would we sell it? We were very proud of the production. We thought we did a great job, but as with any book, you just never know, are people going to buy it or will it just never sell? So it was a little bit of a risk, right? That's the way all books are. And what we found was, I think it earned back the advance that we were given within a year. I think maybe even 9 months it had sold out all the advanced copies that they had estimated, and it continued to sell. And now it still continues to sell. So that was my first great moment, was not only delivering a great book that I was proud of, but then having people recognize and buy it. I would say the second great feeling was when the book was translated into other languages. So right now, the handbook and the workbook, the two books, are of course in English. That's the ones that I did, but they've also been translated into German, into Russian. There's a Czech edition. There's a French edition and a Chinese edition, so there have been a variety of languages, and that was very, very fulfilling for me, that it not only could it help someone who's speaking English, but we could translate the same concept into other cultures and other languages too. So that was another. How did
you do that with the translation? Because yes, some parts are really sketch notes, then you have to the translation also in visuals. Yeah, how did you do that?
So each project was a little bit different. So as an example, the first ones who came to us were the German publishers. They're very interested in this concept, and I made the offer to work with them. They were very interested in having me help them. And what we did was they had a designer who actually did some of the translation work. So
oh, cool.
I think they were able to go in. I provided all the master files to the publisher when they signed for the rights, so they got access to all of the files I used for production that I did.
Yeah.
As an old print designer, it worked out well because I was able to not only write the book and illustrate much of the book, but I managed all the submissions, and then I did all the production design work. So I delivered the files to the printer. So I had all those files, which then I could give to the German publishers, and then I was a guide to them. So as they translated, I guided them on how to do things. I helped, I think they gave me the cover to tune, so I actually did the cover design for them and adjusted it for the German language. And additionally, I helped them find German-speaking sketchnoters in Germany who were willing to replace some of the images that were in English with German ones. So, and additionally, we had some English-speaking sketchnoters that were in the book, and they all agreed to have their things translated. So they had the translator provide the German translations, and they redrew some of the text bits and replaced them. So that turned out really well, and the same thing happened on the French edition for that. As far as the Russian and the Czech edition, they were really crazy. It was awesome because I think they must have had a whole team of people who they redid all of the sketch notes in Cyrillic in Russian, and also the Czech version was the same way. They had teams who actually took all the English words and replaced them with Russian or Czech words through the whole book, which must have been a very big project. And I knew nothing about it. They didn't really need my help, and they did a wonderful job on those translations. So that was, again, a little bit different than the other ones. And then the Chinese one, I didn't have any hand other than providing the files, and they did the same thing. So it was, when you see them, it's like, wow, it's amazing what they did.
Can we expect one in Dutch as well?
You know, I've often talked with my Dutch friends about that, and every Dutchman that I speak to says, you know what, the Dutch understand English so well, there's almost not a reason for it. But I would certainly be wide open to a Dutch publisher doing this in Dutch. I think it would be wonderful, and if there are any Dutch publishers or those who know Dutch publishing houses in the audience, definitely reach out and we'll connect you up. And I think it would be really cool to see it in Dutch. I think the concepts, at least for Western Europe, work pretty well, so that the words can simply be replaced, and most of the time it works pretty well. So I think Dutch language would work well for that kind of instance.
So if anyone on this podcast, some listeners know a good publisher, then it would be nice. Okay, great.
Yeah.
But you was telling us about your most successful moment so far about sketchnoting, that you tell about your first book. Maybe you can continue your story.
Sure. So let me think of a few other times. So South by Southwest, you remember that I went to the conference and I sketchnoted it as one of my early tests. I became friends with the organizers of the conference and just kept in touch. And they reached out a couple of times that were highlights for me. So one year they actually invited me to design the bag, which they give to all the attendees of the conference. So I think some 11,000 people got a bag that I got to design, and I used, of course, my Sketchnote style for that bag with colorful lettering in the shape of Texas. So that was well received. And then later on they invited me with one of my books to come and do a book reading. So I came and I told some stories about the book. So that was very satisfying. And then probably most recently, I was most excited when I was invited to come and teach at Marquette University, which is a well-known U.S. university here in Milwaukee, and I was able to teach engineering professors. So I still remember it was a Saturday, I believe, or a Friday, and I sat down and I looked out in the room, and there were 24 PhD professors sitting in the room looking at me, waiting to be taught sketchnoting. And I remember in that moment thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I hope these guys like me because, you know, but they had a blast. We had them doing all kinds of activities, and it's part of a workshop that I teach for teams now. So many universities have me come, as well as companies, to come and teach their team how to use this sketchnoting and visual thinking to help them think and work individually, but also as teams. And the best moment in that day was probably just after lunchtime, when you would think everyone would be tired, you know, in a day like that. And they were all up excited, drawing on whiteboards together in teams. And the organizer came to me and said, I don't think I've ever seen this many engineers so excited all at the same time in my life. So I felt like that was a very big success from, you know, maybe coming into the room and worrying like, oh, are these guys going to think I'm crazy, to, you know, in the afternoon, here they're all having fun and having a great day all day long doing these visual exercises together. That was a very satisfying moment.
Yeah, that's really cool. What has contributed most to your success? What kind of things?
You know, I think a couple of things. So from the beginning, I always had this mindset of finding partners to work with. In the beginning of doing the book, I had friends who were very skilled at certain things, and they were, of course, local to me. So I had a friend who was very good at doing video work, and I hired him to do the videos that many of the books are accompanied with, and he did both of the books for me and did a wonderful job with the video. I had a friend who did music, and he produced a soundtrack for me that would go with that video series on each book. So he did 2 different soundtracks for me that we could use in the videos. And then another friend who did script writing. So he helped us. You know, I could write the book, but I needed someone to take the book and think of it in a different way as a video script, you know, for video training. And he was able to do that with his experience and turn all of the things that we wanted to teach into nice scripts that we could use for video. So that was wonderful. And then finally, as part of that, a typeface that I developed with another partner named Del Witherington, who lives out in California. He took my handwriting and we worked together to produce a typeface that we used for the book, because I knew as a print designer that there would be changes. I just knew that that's the way these projects go, and if I didn't plan for that, I would end up doing lots of rewriting things by hand, and it might not match, and it would be just a nightmare. So I reached out and found this delve through a friend, and together we built a typeface that I typeset the whole book for. So it looked like my handwriting, but it was really a typeface. And then in the end, after the book was released, we actually cleaned up the typeface and are now selling it as the Sketchnote typeface. You can buy this typeface and the different variations. So I think having this partnership mindset really helped, because I had so many people helping me to make this happen. And then I'll say the partnership worked as well for friends that I'd made over the many years attending South by Southwest or wherever I would meet someone. I would kind of remember the people that I met, and when the book was released, I think we sent out 100 or 150 samples all over the world to all these friends that I'd met in Belgium and Germany and all over the place, and they were able to see early releases of the books and then talked about them. And I think that was really important for people actually seeing the books in the wild and seeing how they looked, because these friends would, of course, take photos of the book and the cover and the inside, and it made it kind of an interesting thing for others to check out. So that partnership with all these people, I think, was really helpful.
Yeah, wow. And what was the best advice you were ever given to you?
The best advice I was ever given. I think it was focus on the work, the money will come. I remember this from when I was in college. I had a professor who told me, focus on your craft, do very good work, and then the opportunities will come, the money will come when you do that work. And I found that to be very true, that when I focus on doing good work and then making these partnerships, that combination seems to provide opportunity after opportunity to do good work for other people. I think people can see and feel when your passion is involved in the work you do, and that gets translated at some level. And I think that's helped me to do a variety of projects that I've been very proud of.
Yeah, sure. Was it always a bed of roses for you? Was it always you always have success, or you also have some bad times maybe?
Yeah, no, everything's always been perfect. It's been so easy, and nothing's ever gone wrong. No, just kidding. I will say, so going back to the first book, and this has been true in a variety of things, the first book, the Sketchnote Handbook, was maybe one of the hardest projects I've ever done, because I took on so much. We were doing a video at the same time as writing and producing a book. It was 9 months. We produced all that work in 9 months, and I was still working a full-time job, or nearly a full-time job at the same time. So there was not much time left over. I would work and come home and then work on my book and work on the weekends, and it was just always working for those 9 months. It was very intense, and things went wrong with the book too. We sometimes couldn't get some artwork that we wanted. Someone wouldn't respond, or the bigger one was when we released the book, Amazon produced a Kindle version, but because of the way we produced the PDFs, Amazon's processing system really couldn't handle a two-color PDF, which is what we produced. If you look at it as a PDF, it works just fine, but when you run it through Amazon's processing, what happened was the middle of the book went blank. So all the two-color PDF stuff just disappeared, and they were selling basically an empty Kindle file. And we had all these complaints all over the Amazon.com. So you can go now. If you go to Amazon.com, I don't know if this is true in the Dutch version, but if you go to Amazon.com and you find my book and look at the reviews, there's a whole list of these one-star reviews of all these people angry about the Kindle not working. And it was painful because it was really hard to get Amazon to really correct it, and it seemed like we would just, it wouldn't be a problem. We would just fix it and rerun it, but it turned out to be a much deeper technical problem and the combination of elements made it just a real challenge to get that fixed. So it took, I think, 4 or 5 months to change this, which is crazy. And so, you know, in the meantime, all these one-star reviews are piling up, and, you know, fortunately the book was also released in print, so people like the book, and, you know, most of the reviews are quite good. But there's still, you know, sort of this thing hanging around with these Kindle, and, you know, many of the people returned the book before we could fix it because it took so long, and, you know, in many ways I don't blame them for being upset. But in many cases, I was being blamed in these comments, and I have nothing that I can do. It's all, we're relying on Amazon to do these changes, and they were not really in any hurry to do it. And so that was a really painful process. I'll say one other story, and this is, so after the first book, the handbook came out, I was offered to do the Sketchnote workbook, which is taking the idea of sketchnoting and thinking, how many ways can we apply this to different things? So we did a whole book on how to use it for brainstorming, or how do you document a process, how do you capture your travel, or maybe the food you're eating, or a TV show you like, or a film, or music. There were all these different ways that sketchnoting could be applied. And so we produced that book. It went quite well. But right in the middle of it, I think almost exactly in the middle of it, my wife had a health issue, and we had to take a couple of weeks off to solve that health issue. And honestly, I didn't know if we would finish the book, because it was just such a severe, you know, trauma at the time, and we basically had to stop everything for a while, and I just didn't know if I could still deliver on time. And our community around us, our friends and family and people we know, all came to our aid, and we're doing things like washing the floor in our kitchen and cleaning our toilets and making us food, and it was really insane, but it was really hard because my wife is incapacitated and had to work through this therapy, and so it was very difficult to, you know that she's in pain and have to feel like I had to finish this book. And we got her back to a place where she was comfortable, and we had all this community helping us, and then I was able to finish the book and deliver it. It was very, very hard because it was just, you know, just an excruciating time. But it's interesting too that at the same time we found who our friends were, right? You know, that's the old statement, when things go wrong, you find who your friends are. Yeah. And we really did. And I think that just reinforced that earlier statement I said about my value in partnerships and finding people to partner with. And then even the ultimate idea of success is how do we make it so everybody wins? That's the goal. And so now my wife is doing well. Her health issue has been solved, and she's doing well. And the book is released and has done well too. But it was definitely, for a couple of months there, was very, very difficult. And you know, the thing that I kept telling myself every day when I would wake up was, you know, I don't have to do the whole book tonight, but I just have to make progress. If I can make progress, I can succeed. So every night I would do as much as I could until I couldn't do it anymore and stop. And the next night I would do a little bit more. And you know, books are like that. Books are not things you can just do, you know, quickly. You have to really do them a bit at a time. And you can't just do it in a weekend. It's months of work, right? Yeah. So you have to sort of pace yourself a little bit. It's like the Tour de France, right? Where you can't win the Tour de France in one stage. You have to do the mountains. You have to do the sprints. You have to fight through heat and cold and rain and, you know, whatever it is. It's a long, you know, period of time that you do it through. And I think books and many projects are the similar way. And I think the best way I've found was just simply make progress today. If I can make progress today, that's better than not making progress, and that's served me well.
Yeah, do everything a bit, and then you finished the book. Besides your own book, which book do you recommend to the listeners?
You know, I know that the listeners are often entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. One of the books that I actually helped illustrate, I'm very proud of, and I think is a very practical, sensible book. And many of the entrepreneurs in this audience may have heard of it, and it's one you mentioned in the beginning. It's called Rework, from David Hansen and Jason Fried, the owners and founders of Basecamp. Mm-hmm. I continue to hear how this book has impacted so many people. I felt really very, very honored that they would invite me to help amplify the ideas through illustrations in that book. And we had a great time producing that book together and refining it and working together to come up with concepts in visual form that would, the ultimate goal with that book was, how can we make an image that represents the text and text that represents the image to the point that they actually become fused as almost one thing. And I think we succeeded very well with that book, and that's one that I'm very proud to give away and recommend, because I think there's so much practical knowledge in there. So much of what we do in business now is just, well, we've always done it that way. But why do we always do it that way? And this book really sort of pokes some holes in some of those ideas and says, why don't we rethink the things that we assume that we must do, and maybe it actually turns out that we don't have to do them at all. So yeah. That's a great book, I think.
If you want to, if you give advice to other entrepreneurs, what kind of advice would that be?
Well, I think, there's often this advice is thrown around about following your passion, and I don't know that that's always so great, because you might be passionate about something that will never be a great business, right? There has to be sort of this alignment between the thing you love and a business that you not only can sustain, but do you really want to be in that for enough time to make it succeed, right? Are you going to hate it by the time you're at the end of it? So I would say I would say experiment. I think I found a lot of success by experimentation. So as you heard in the story of sketchnoting, how I came to it was I was in a painful place, and I had to solve this problem, and I experimented by changing up my situation and trying something. And even now, that's true for what I do. I'm always trying new tools. So if I find a new pen or a paper, or I have an iPad Pro and a pencil. So that started as an experiment. Could I do sketchnoting and drawing on this crazy iPad with a pencil? And it turns out, yes, I could, and it's actually very convenient, and it fits, different needs than paper and pen do. So experimenting for me has been very valuable. So I think, and the end result of that is, if you experiment and try different things out and sort of mix things up a little bit, that will lead you to opportunities that maybe someone else can't see or is just not in a place to see. So as you work through these experiments and you find something that is something you're interested in, you could sustain it, and that you would have fun at the same time, then you sort of stumbled onto the thing that maybe you can do for your life's work, if that's what your goal is, or if you're an entrepreneur who wants to come up with an idea to sell to someone else. Those combinations also are important, to find something that you're willing to spend this part of your life on and really invest into. It's important that you test things out, make sure they work, and that you can actually deal with it for the time that you need to make it get to where it needs to go.
Yeah. What kind of app do you use on the iPad for sketchnoting?
Well, there's a couple that I have been using. One of my favorites is a free one. It's called Paper by a company named 53. They're in New York. What I like about this app is it's very close to Paper in many ways. It's limited in some ways, so they call it opinionated software. So there's certain things that it doesn't do. There's no layers, even to the point where you can copy within a document, but you can't copy between the documents, so it forces you to make some decisions. The tools are very simple. There's not lots of details that you can fiddle with, so it sort of forces you just to use it to get to work. So that's one of my favorites. A couple of other ones are an app called Concepts, which is quite a different application. It's built on a vector drawing engine, and for those who don't know what that means is there's two ways you can do graphics on a computer. One is called bitmap, and that's where it's pixels stacked next to each other, or maybe a partial pixel so it looks like it's got a soft edge. Vectors are a mathematical representation of an edge or a curve or a shape, and they don't take as much space as a pixel does, right? Because every pixel must be represented. With a vector, you can plot it in a mathematical way to appear proportional to the page, which means if you draw with vectors and you size it up, you can make it the size of a building and the edges will still be crisp because it sizes to the scale it needs. Or you can size it as small as a postage stamp, and again, it will still maintain that quality. So this Concepts application uses a vector approach, which means when you draw things, they look like they're hand-drawn, but you can select them, you can size them, you can change the color, you can change
sounds cool.
what pen it is. Yeah, so like let's say for example in this app, say I did a pencil sketch, but I thought, you know, I'd really like that to be a pen. I can use the selection tool, select the drawing that I've done, and then switch the brush to a pen, and all the pencil lines will change to pen lines.
Wow.
It's got layers and other things. There's a really great development team behind it who are very active and a great community of people. So that's one to definitely check out. There's two others that I'll mention. One is called Procreate, which is it's much more of a drawing application.
Mm-hmm.
Pencil I think of almost as more like a sketching application. Concepts is more like an illustration tool. Procreate is much more of a drawing, like a fine artist drawing application, but it can be, of course, used in other ways. It allows lots of control over the brushes, the brush size, the angle, like even more than I can even describe in this podcast. But it's really powerful because you can make your own brushes. And there's so many features in Procreate that allow you to do different canvas sizes. You can make huge, canvases if you like, and so many colors and other things. It's really geared for professional artists, but anyone can use it. And then the last one is one I just actually downloaded yesterday. It's an app called Linnea, L-I-N-E-A, and it's a new application, L-I-N-E-A. Yeah. It's different than the others, so all three of those I think have a free version and then a pro version. The Concepts and Procreate have pro versions where you buy the features that you like. Linnea takes a little bit different approach. They simply charge $10 up front, and then you have the application, which, if you're used to free apps, sounds like it's expensive, but I think the quality is good. It's from a company who makes icons, so they have a vested interest in making a good tool. And I'm excited about the opportunity of their future development. That's really why I wanted to buy it, to support them so that they can continue to make it a sketching tool that I can use. And I think Linnea is a lot like Paper by 53. It's a little bit more limited. There's sort of an opinion about how things will work. It's very simple. And it's intended for user interface designers and other designers to sketch. But again, anyone can use it for sketching. So that's one that's new, and I haven't tested too much, but what I see so far looks quite nice.
Sounds cool. And if you want to do by pen and paper, what kind of pen do you use?
I'm always experimenting and testing pens. The ones that I use lately, there's three that I quite love. The first is a Papermate Flare, which I don't know if you know about these pens or not. It's a felt tip pen. Mm-hmm. It's the same pen that Quentin Tarantino writes all of his scripts. He gets big yellow American legal pads,
yes,
and a box of Flare pens, and he writes all his scripts this way to start with.
Okay.
So it's many grade school kids use these pens because they're pretty inexpensive, but I found them to be just really wonderful. They have a nice firm point. The ink lasts a pretty long time. You can get them in many colors. I don't know the availability of these in Europe, but I know that they can be found in the U.S., and they come in a variety of colors. So that's one that I use quite a bit. Mm-hmm. A second one that I quite like is called the Uniball Air. It's a relatively new pen, and I stumbled onto it by accident in an office supply section of a store. And what I liked about it was it had a flow almost like that of a fountain pen. So it had sort of a very wet flow on paper. So what's great about it is also the thing that's challenging about it. So because it's so smooth and wet, you get a wonderful line, and it's very black. But the problem is it takes longer to dry, especially if you don't have, if your paper is not very porous, it can take a little while to dry. So you just have to accommodate for that. But I think I really like the way the pen feels. Again, it feels like a fountain pen. And then the last one I'll mention is called the Pentel Energel. I know these are available in Europe. They may look a little different than they do in the States, but it's a very reliable pen. It's very much like the Pilot G2, if someone knows what that is.
Yeah, that's the one I use.
The one you use. And the Uniball Signo. I really like the Pentel Energel. I think the ball and the tip is very sturdy, and I think the ink that they do is very black. It flows well, but it dries quickly. So that combination, I really like the combination of those three. And then as far as books go, as far as the paper that I like, there's a few books that I quite like. I still like my Moleskine notebooks, but I've discovered a couple of years ago, and when I went to Prague, and a little before that, I learned about the brand from Germany called Leuchtturm 1917, which is quite a nice book. And I quite like their sketchbook because the paper is very thick and it's a bright white color. So I've been very impressed with those notebooks for both my a regular notebook as well as a sketchbook. And then the last one I'll mention is the Baron Fig Confidant, which is an American company out of Brooklyn, I believe. And it's a nice linen cover. It's about the size of it's a little bit bigger than A5, but it's somewhere in that neighborhood. A linen cover, and the bookmark is a nice bright yellow, so it's kind of unique. And I think it comes in sort of a silver-colored linen or a charcoal linen. And they have quite a line of other notebooks and pens and pencils and such. But I quite like these Baron Fig. The brand is called, the model is called Confidant because the paper is pretty thick. It's got a little bit of a texture to it, so it's good for pencil drawing. It can absorb, remember the Uniball Air being wet, it absorbs that quite well. And it holds pretty much most inks reasonably well. So that's another book that I like to use.
Cool. I have some last questions for you. What habits are essential for you to be successful?
You know, I'm finding that having a daily journaling exercise has been very valuable to me. I've started doing this about 3 or 4 years ago. I was inspired by my friend Austin Kleon, who he's written a couple of books, Steal Like an Artist and Show Your Work are 2 books that he's written that are quite good. And he kept talking about this logbook that he did, and he would buy basically a journal book, you know, with all the dates printed in there, and every day he would just write a little something that he did. But I think his perspective on it was he kept it open at his desk, and as he would do work, he would write things he was thinking about or whatever was on his mind. He really used it almost like in a way like a scratch pad or just to capture things as they happened. I always was challenged with diaries in the past where, you know, I would sit at the end of the day and reflect on the day. I would eventually, you know, go a few months and then I would just forget about it. And sort of opening it up and leaving it on my desk as a logbook, something that I would use all through the day, seemed to fit my personality better, and it got me into a rhythm of journaling. And now that I've been doing that for a few years, doing the more reflective journaling is much easier for me. But I find it's really valuable to sort of document the things I'm thinking about, and then at the end of the year, I come back and I reflect on where I started the year and sort of the major themes of the year, and I can sort of look back and see the progression of the year. And I think having this place where I can write about what's on my mind is really valuable and helps me to see what does success mean to me or what am I thinking about. So that, I think, is quite a valuable tool for me.
Yeah, that's for me as well, really valuable tool. I started with it, I think, a half a year ago. I tried to do it, same as you, that it was quite difficult for me to start with a diary or something. But when I do it, just during the day or start with it in the morning, then it was easier for me. And now I wrote, I think, 3 books already since I'm here.
Wow.
I write a lot.
You have a lot in you.
Yeah. And I also tried some art journaling and to do a little bit of creative process. So it's I really like journaling. Cool.
Yes, I do too. And a lot of times Sketchnotes will find their way into that book too.
Yeah,
so if I feel like drawing something, I do it. And something new that I can mention that I've been trying for the last month or so that I quite like is called the 5-Minute Journal. Have you heard of this before?
Yeah.
So that's apparently very popular. I had one. I met the guy, one of the founders, and he sent a copy for me to try, and I quite like it. It's I think of it almost like because it's a little bit repetitive. Every day is the same questions. It's aimed around gratitude. What are you grateful for? And then what are you capable of? And in some ways, I feel like it's reprogramming my thinking. Right? It's me writing to myself. I'm like writing the code for my mind, and the things that I write in that little 5-minute journal sort of direct me in where I want to go and what I want to believe about myself. And oddly enough, I find myself sort of adapting to what I'm writing. And so it's like I'm telling myself what I want to be, and then I'm conforming to it, which is really an interesting idea that maybe is another valuable thing that I'm starting to incorporate into my morning routine.
Yeah. What kind of morning routine do you have?
You know, I used to be a night person. I would stay up quite late and not get up early if I wanted to, but I've switched that in the last few years. Kids have some impact on that, but now I do it so I can get up before the kids are awake. So usually about 6 o'clock in the morning I get up. I do some exercise, and I'll make a cup of tea, and then I'll do my journaling. So I have a little Japanese journal called a Hobonichi Techo, which I buy in the mid-year every year that they offer. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful little notebook from Japan. The paper is very thin, and yet it holds up even fountain pen ink. It won't bleed through. So it's really good quality paper. And that's the logbook that I keep. So that's got all the days of the year in there. And I write down, I've been writing down my sort of my vitals. So I write down what's my weight, how did I sleep. I have a little sleep tracker in my phone, and I write down the quality of my sleep and how long. I have a little space where I track the water that I drink, and I register my heart rate and other things like that. So at least I have that in the top of the page, and then a lot of times I'll lay out my day and sort of write what are the things that I want to achieve today, and I'll do those in the book. And then I'll switch to the 5-minute journal and do that for a few minutes while I'm enjoying the tea, and then get myself ready for work, and usually drive or take the bus depending on the morning, and head in for a day of work. And I work as a user experience designer, and I help build software inside of an insurance company on this contract that I'm on. So it's quite fun.
Cool. Wow. One more question. What would you recommend the listeners should they do first after this podcast?
Maybe a fun challenge would be this, to look around you and find the nearest pen and paper. Maybe it's the back of an envelope of some junk mail that you have, or the next page of your notebook, or whatever, and think about what you were imagining after hearing this podcast about sketchnoting, about challenges, about journaling, about something, and do a little doodle, do a little sketch note on that paper to express maybe one idea that you think you can use from this podcast. And then keep that with you during the week and see if that helps guide you towards doing that. I think that would be an interesting experiment for everyone to try, even if it's just a tiny little sketch note, just 3 to 5 minutes to draw something and write some words that you can take away from this podcast that you think would help your life, and then use that as sort of a reference point. And I would love to see those if you want to share those. If you're on Twitter or Instagram,
nice.
Yeah, put those up, and maybe Janneke, you can, in the show notes, you can leave a hashtag you'd like to use, and then I can track those. That would be fun. I'd love to interact with those who are listening on the podcast.
That's what we're we're going to do. That's really cool. I shall add the hashtag in my blog post, so if they listen now, then they can go to my blog jannekestilstra.nl, and then they can see the hashtag, and they can share also the sketch notes with each other. That would be really fun to do. Great.
Yeah.
Where, Mike, can I find more information about you?
Sure. So the best places to go would be my website, which is rohdesign.com. So ROHDESIGN.com. That has my books, and I have a blog there. You can sign up for my newsletter, where I search around and find things interesting to me about sketchnoting and visual thinking and share it, usually between every couple of weeks. I'm most active in 2 places. One is Twitter, and the other is Instagram, and both use the same name. So that's, again, Rohdesign, ROHDESIGN. So if you find me on Twitter or Instagram, say hello. I would love to chat with you, and maybe next time I'm in Amsterdam or somewhere in Holland, I can have a coffee with you.
Oh, great. That would be nice. So rohdesign.com would be great if you go to that place, and I will thank you to this nice and really interesting interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janneke. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the time that you provided and the opportunity.
This edition has come to an end now. Go to jannekestrielstra.nl to have a look at the notes to the podcast. At the bottom of my website you will find the search bar. Type in Mike Rohde and you will find the notes of this podcast. Subscribe to my podcast to never miss an episode again. Download my free ebook now in which I share the 7 habits of successful entrepreneurs with you. Go to jannekestrielstra.nl to download the ebook immediately. In the next episode I will interview Josette Dijkhuizen. De volgende week dus Josette Dijkhuizen. Abonneer je op mijn podcast zodat je deze aflevering niet gaat missen. Graag inspireer ik jou om van dromen naar doen te gaan.